Hello, hello, Alex, and hello, Sohail. Yes, so good morning to everyone who's joined us from the US, afternoon in Europe, and good evening to everyone from India. This is a real privilege today to have an opportunity to talk to two veterans who are exceptional in their service to their respective countries, United States and India, and now are distinguished alumni and a current student from MIT. So let me first introduce our first panelist, Lieutenant Colonel Sohail Saudagar. Sohail has served the Indian Army for more than 20 years, has had a mix of leadership roles in combat and non combat, and did some really interesting work around geosensing, cutting edge work for the military. And it's an absolute pleasure, Sohail, to have you here with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm delighted to introduce Alex Min. Alex was a former major in the United States Navy and a combat pilot. 10
Marine
years
Corps. Marine
in
Corps.
in the Marine Corps. Yes, Alex. Thanks. In the Marine Corps. Uh, Alex actually served for 10 years and applied during his time serving. His college was sponsored, and he did not get in when he applied when he was serving. So a lot of lessons learned by Alex, but came back stronger after 5 years in the semiconductor industry and had wins at every top school imaginable. So I've had the pleasure to work really closely with Alex, and it's an absolute delight to have him on the panel today.
Sorry for correcting you, Deepak. Marine Corps. Being called Navy. I love the Navy, but I was in the Marines, so.
Yes, no, absolutely. No, thanks for pointing that out. Actually, Alex, I'll start with you. You've been a veteran yourself, and you've worked with a lot of veterans. For those who don't know, Alex has been an industry stalwart, an entrepreneur, but his favorite role, according to me, was a senior colleague at the MBA Exchange. So he's helped a lot of veterans get into top schools and a lot of other applicants get into top schools. So, Alex, what are some specific skills in your view that veterans bring that probably are not found in other applicants?
Very good question. Especially for regular 2-year, I should say regular, but 2-year MBA programs, it's a little different when you get mid-career. But as we all know, the top tier schools, the average age is usually 27, 28-ish in the bell curve, in the middle of the bell curve. Generally, I say this generally, non-military people have not had a lot of leadership experience, especially investment banking, management consulting. They've been individual contributors. Us as military people, even as a second lieutenant, had 30 people that I was in charge of over 2 or 3 layers. So I think that is one of the major differentiators, is that we've generally, as officers, we've had leadership and management experience beyond our peers, especially if you're, late 20s, early 30s, in that range. However, I will say that your competition applying to business school is not the management consultants from McKinsey or the investment bankers from Goldman Sachs. It's other military people. So we'll probably get into that more, but you need to differentiate yourself from the other infantry people or special forces or pilots or logistics or whatever area of specialty you're coming from.
Excellent. Sohail, that brings me straight to you. Sohail is currently studying at the MIT Sloan Fellows program, so he's as fresh in his insights as one can get.
Yes.
He knows everything that's happening on campus, and it's great to have you live almost from campus. We see the campus as your background. So, Sohail, when you look back at your journey now, and I know you've been giving your wisdom to a lot of other veterans, and I know that, and we have quite a few people in common. When you look back and just taking on from what Alex mentioned, what skills in your profile you think helped you the most now that you look back with some time and distance in your application journey? What do you think were the spikes or skills in your profile that helped you make it to MIT Sloan Fellows program?
So there's so many things that come to the mind, but yes, the leadership aspect is something that I have to repeat it because it is a very pertinent facet. What Alex mentioned, the leadership factor does remain. Apart from that, I believe the people from the military community, they are trained to remain focused. They are trained to be very vigilant. That helps, and to be able to observe surroundings, orient themselves well, and to imbibe things fast. There's a continuous learning curve that is always part of our military culture. I think that helps a lot. So it is the leadership aspect as well as your ability to focus and learn.
Fantastic. And having seen your profile and candidacy up close, I definitely think you brought all of those to the table. Just a quick follow up then with you, Sohail.
Yeah.
Let's say if one of your brothers in arms is looking to apply to a top school
Yeah.
and enter school fall next year.
Hmm.
And as they're evaluating their options and looking at their own profile, what is the one piece of advice that you would want to give them in general? One or two pieces of advice that you wish you had when you were looking at your school options and making this transition?
So everyone has a unique story, Everyone has a different background. Everyone has a unique story. No matter if you come from the same military, wear the same uniform, build on that story. Bring your uniqueness to the school. That is what the school wants. Everyone knows that the military veteran has leadership skills. He has certain aspects of integrity, honesty, loyalty. These aspects come as part of his being. But apart from that, you will always have a unique story to tell as a military veteran. That is something that must remain as a part of your application, and that is what you highlight to actually say to be seen as different from probably other candidates. That's what makes you different, and that's what will probably get you selected.
It's a very good point, Sohail. As you were mentioning that, I was reflecting on all the veterans that we've had the privilege to work with. Um, and it's so true that everyone has something unique in their profile, so much so that, and Alex will probably also agree with this, but I'm remembering veteran applicants that we worked with at the MBA exchange from, let's say, a decade back. A couple of them went to Harvard, Stanford, and I can remember snippets of their profile as if it was yesterday that we worked with them. So some of those stories, and especially a story that from someone who went to Stanford MSX that both of us know from the Indian Army, I remember it as if it was yesterday. So it's a great point.
Sure.
Alex, as a veteran and now having graduated from school some time back, when you look back at your journey and what you picked up from the 2 year MBA program at MIT, was there something from the program that really surprised you in a very positive way that you did not expect to get?
Maybe because I was 36 the second time I applied. It's a little more mature than some of my classmates, or more older anyway. I don't know about more mature. I wouldn't say there are any major surprises, but one thing I kind of knew but didn't know to the degree of, to answer your question, would be the strength of the network. I would argue that going to a top-tier MBA program, half the worth of the tuition you're paying for at least is the network. I knew that kind of going into it, but then when I got there and I looked to my left, looked to my right, I was like, how did I get in? I mean, my peers are amazing. And to this day, since I graduated in 2007, there's practically not a day that goes by that I'm not talking to one of my friends from business school, whether it's personal or business, whether it's talking about our children or helping each other with our careers. So the network has been one of the most amazing, powerful things. And I would give advice to anyone on this audience that is fortunate enough to get into a top tier school and attends that, yes, learning how to do a discounted cash flow and evaluating a company, that's important. But I would also say, spend a lot of time meeting as many of your peers as possible and forging those friendships.
I'm sure Sohail is taking down those notes because it's relevant for him while he's at school. But Alex, I might have to point out that you're being really humble over here because you not only got into MIT, but if I remember correctly, you got into probably four other schools, if I'm correct, at the minimum. So
Yeah, what this session isn't about me, but what's relevant is that I failed the first time and I didn't know why. And I was actually a stronger candidate back then. 5 years later, when I reapplied, I was actually a less strong candidate and way kind of old for a regular 2 MBA program. But for my own reasons, I wanted to do that. But to answer your question, not to be coy, I applied to 10 schools my second time, which I don't recommend, and we don't recommend at the MBA Exchange to most people. But I had to do it for myself. I actually got into 6, interviewed from 8, got into 6 and waitlisted at 1. And I eventually got off the waitlist on that as well. But it was because this isn't about advertising the MBA Exchange, and thank you to our partners, the GMAT Club. But it was really my consultant and how he taught me to tell my story, which I couldn't agree with Suel more. How to tell your story. The first time around, my consultant read my essays and said, "You sound like every other military pilot getting out and using business school to transition to a civilian life. Where's the differentiation here?" Second time around, he helped me really tell my story much better. So I don't know if that's a good answer to your question. The simple answer is yes. I was very fortunate. And of the schools I got into, some of the top ones were IMD, INSEAD in Europe, and Wharton and MIT Sloan in the US. But it was all due to my consultant that helped me tell my story.
fantastic. And just as I was hearing you, Alex, you 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 failed the first time, and you didn't mention some of the things you did differently. But in some ways, now that you reflect back on it, how did the failure actually help you? How did not succeeding at business school make you a stronger applicant? The second time, not. Well, as you mentioned, the odds were actually not in your favor. 2 year program, 36-year-old. So, how did that failure help you become a stronger applicant? Because a lot of people who might be listening in today, and you know that we work with a lot of people at the MBA Exchange, who don't have perfect credentials or backgrounds and don't look perfect profiles on paper, and sometimes they are reapplicants, and some of them may be carrying the scars of the failure of applying to school. So that perspective from you would be really helpful for those applicants.
I know it sounds like such a cliche, but one does learn from their failures, or should. One should learn from their failures. And I would say when I failed, I was 29, getting out of the military when I applied. I would have been 30 when I attended. I didn't think of going to business school again, Deepak. I failed. I got out. I was married and leaving the military and transitioned to a pretty cushy civilian life. Something happened at work that made me revisit it. But when I revisited going to business school, I remembered that I failed 5 years ago. So I would say it made me more hungry, which is important. I think drive and ambition is important, but also channeling that. So my wife is a smart one in the family, as a lot of families. So she said, "Alex, you don't know what you're doing. You need to hire an admissions consultant." And I didn't even know that was a thing, to be honest, the first time I applied. And I kind of didn't like the idea of needing help or getting help, but I looked around, found someone I liked and started working with them, and realized, oh my gosh, I really don't know what the business schools are looking for, how to position myself. I think one of the issues with military people, there's a lot of positives. One of the problems we have is a lot of the professional militaries that I've worked with, not just the US, all over the world, India included, officers tend to be humble. And you really do need to sell yourself. Not be arrogant, but you do need to. I mean, I've worked with combat veterans with Combat V on major awards and medals, and they're just putting to light the fact that they were in a firefight involving hundreds of people on both sides. That's huge, right? From a civilian perspective, especially. So I'm answering your question in multiple ways, but I think I spoke too much. If that kind of answers your question. Hungry, look for help, and oh, I didn't answer your question specifically. It's the analysis. Why did I fail the first time? Analyzing where I fell short and then making up for it.
No, thanks so much for that. Sohail, I'll jump to you with a specific question.
Yep.
As you look around your cohort now and start to discover who your batchmates are and start to do some group work, um, what is the one thing or couple of things that you've seen here in your first couple of months on campus that you did not expect?
Okay, so one part is definitely that uh, as a military individual, I've served all my life as a professional in the army. So I was for 20 years, I was in the army, and thereafter I just hopped on a plane and landed at Cambridge, MIT Sloan. So one part surely is how accomplished the cohort is. The quality of individuals that I am interacting with, or for that matter, anyone who lands up in the B school of this stature lands up in, the quality of cohort is absolutely out of the world. The people you meet, what their experiences are, what their business experiences are, the quality that they bring to the class, the experience that they bring to the class is, and that is the real learning. Of course, the quality of the professors that we have here is second to none. It's an absolute joy to attend some of the classes. But yes, the cohort makes a lot of difference. The people who are here with me, I am truly blessed to be there, be with them. And there's one thing else that I wanted to make aspirants aware that you may end up at MIT Sloan, or you may end up at Stanford, or one of the better B schools. Please do check as to what the academic format there is. So at MIT Sloan, we have a system of bidding wherein one is given certain number of points, and one has to bid for their fall subjects. One has to bid for their the winter subjects as also their spring subjects. Now, how that makes a difference is, you may come to the business school thinking you will learn from a set pattern curriculum. No, that is not the case. There is no set pattern curriculum. There are at least 500 odd subjects from MIT, the Sloan School of Management, MIT, the engineering school, as well as Harvard. There are so many subjects to take, and you can take only as much as you can bid for. There is the bidding process stems from the aspect of limitation of real estate at MIT, so to say, wherein classes can have only limited number of students. So because students bid, the only ones who get into a certain class are the ones who bid max for that particular class. What this ensures is that if you're interested in a certain class, then you get into it by bidding maximum number of points. You can't just get into every class, or you can't just have every subject that you want to get into. So this is something from the this is a very insider information that I want to put forth to everyone. This is something that one must keep in mind.
That's fantastic for all those who are looking to apply and pick the schools. On that note, Sohail, a specific question which almost everyone at this point of time is thinking about or just recently grappled with. If you're a
Yeah.
veteran,
Uh-huh.
and you can make this specific for veterans from India, and you're looking at which competitive entrance test should one take. Should it be the GMAT? Should it be the GRE? Should it be the EA? Or should you ask for a waiver? Can you give the audience a template as to how to think about this question? Because this comes up with almost every veteran applicant.
I understand. I understand. So, first of all, waiver. I feel if a school, if you're wanting to, you are the needy baby who wants to get into a school, you have to show them that you want to get there and you want to uh, show all your abilities uh, with the GMAT oblique, GRE oblique, EA included. So when you want to show your abilities, you must give the exam. The GMAT, if possible, must be given. EA is an option to be exercised, I feel, only when you are short on time. GMAT also allows you for multiple options. EA straight away reduces your number of options as far as colleges are concerned. There are a number of B schools which do not accept the executive assessment exam. That is something that all aspirants must keep in mind, that EA is only limited to a certain number of schools. GMAT is applicable in almost all schools, GMAT oblique GRE. And the preparation aspects, one must keep in mind there is a certain preparation time that is involved as far as these exams are concerned. GMAT will take you at least about 4 to 5 months, and EA would take you, depending on your abilities, anything from 1 week to about 2 months.
Great.
I hope.
We've had some questions. Yes, no, that is really relevant. I've taken down some notes, which is going to be useful for me when I'm advising some of the veterans who are working with the MBA exchange. There have been a few questions that have come up. One of them from Devinder Chilla, which I'll throw open to both of you. He's asked two questions, but let me start with his first question. He's essentially asking, how does one decide whether one should look at a 2 year program versus a 1 year program? And that's a perfect question for this panel, because we have Alex, who decided to go for a 2 year program, and so you were very clear you wanted to go only for a 1 year program. So maybe we start with Alex, since he made a choice which was not very intuitive at his age to go for a 2 year program. Alex, how did you look at the pros and cons?
Yeah, I would start answering the question by, and we say this often in admissions consulting, there is no right or wrong answer. I mean, there can be, but generally a lot of times there's no right or wrong answer, and it depends. And so I would say some of the obvious differences are 1 year is 1 year and 2 years, 2 year. So you pay less tuition for 1 year and you get your degree quicker and you can move on. Having said that, in the US, it's a little different in some places in Europe and Asia, but the 1 year programs are generally geared for mid-career people, a little more mature, a little more work experience. And then the 2 year programs, generally the age distribution bell curve, they're a little younger, late 20s, right? So there's that difference. And Suel made a very good point. Who is your cohort going to be? Now, having said that, I mean, this is a very unusual poll case, but I worked with a client who was in his 20s that wanted to go to a very specific executive MBA program, and he got in, even though he was only 20 something. And the average age was like 36, 37 for that particular program. It was Cornell, but he had a very specific focus. So some of the more other differences that are less on the surface level, and this was one of the reasons why I chose the 2 year MBA program. In a 1 year program, you have limited time to figure out what your career move is going to be after getting your MBA. When you're busy with school, there's traditionally no summer internship. With the 2 year MBA program, you have the summer internship to experiment, try an industry or a function, and see if you like it or not. If you like it and you do well, ideally you get a job offer out of it as well. So you have more time. So that was so of course, in my applications, I knew exactly what I wanted to do after getting my MBA, but the reality was I really had no idea what I wanted to do after getting my MBA. By the way, that was one of the reasons I failed the first time. I never clearly articulated what I wanted to do after getting my MBA and why going to business school was a stepping stone for my career. It was never clearly articulated. The second time I articulated it very well, but I really didn't know, to be honest. And so I wanted that time to figure it out. And I trust Jimmy Suel is so right. The first month, September, when I showed up on campus, I would have lunch with someone different every day on purpose, grab the management consultant. What's it like working at McKinsey? Oh, really? You're gone that much? I have a child. I'm already married. Maybe I don't want to do that. Then I would talk to an investment banker. Oh my God, that sounds so exciting. Everyone's job was exciting, but then I would figure out what I wanted to do by having these conversations. And then summer internship was critical for me to have that time to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. Also, your relationships. With a 1 year residential program, you're actually going to have some decent time with your peers. Executive MBA programs where you're meeting on the weekends, you bond, but it's less strong because you just don't have the time. With the 2-year MBA program, you're going to trips together. I mean, you have a weekend. Suhail will learn this if he hasn't already. On Thursdays at MIT Sloan, there's a tradition of something called the C function, C stands for consumption. And every school has something like that, social events. So that is a big differentiator, I would say. So to summarize, there are many, many other things we could talk about, but I don't want to monopolize this entire event. I would say who your cohort's going to be, and it's where they are in their careers. That's the relevant metric, if you will. And then also how much time you're going to be at the school. And of course, it's more money as well. So those are some of my points that I would point out between differences.
Excellent. Jasmeet, who's just written in, he's a part of the Coast Guard, has a similar question. He wants to know 1 year versus 2 years. So I'm sure a lot of people, even from India, are grappling between this question of 1 year versus 2 year. So how did you make the choice? What were your parameters?
So some numbers over here. The average age in my cohort is 39 years, and I myself presently am 42. So for someone like me, it was a very easy choice because I knew that I had had a professional life for about 20 years, and I was taking a gap, and this gap was for to allow me to transition well, and this is the educational period for me, so to say. So I wanted to keep this to a minimum yet meaningful, and that's why I went for 1 year. Whereas the 2 year will give you more time to interact with the cohort, more time to make good decisions, as Alex has brought out. But for me, it was more important to probably get into the professional scene as early as possible. Also, there is one part of your curve going downwards once you reach 45. For someone like me, that also is a pertinent factor. So I wanted to avoid that part as much as possible, and that's why I went for a 1 year MBA. And yes, the people that you interact with in this particular program is a different combination altogether. That is something also to consider.
Sure. Just on a lighter note there, Sohail, if you hadn't publicly broadcast your age, we would have never guessed.
Thanks so much, Deepak.
Uh, all right. It actually brings me to a point that, when I was looking at the kind of questions I wanted to ask, it didn't strike me, but it did strike me now considering both your answers and something that Alex mentioned. This is more of an existential question actually for all MBA applicants, but even more relevant for veterans. How important or advantageous is it for someone to have conviction and clarity about their post MBA goals when they apply to business school, and especially when they're applicants who are mid age or slightly advanced in age? And I would want both your perspective on this because, as Alex would know, we spent, and as Sohail you would know, both of you at different points have been clients of the MBA exchange, and we have a very rigorous sort of methodology and formats to really get into what your real goals are. But the question is broader. Should one really have a degree of conviction and clarity in their goals to make most out of business school, or things will work out once you get into school? I'm very curious to know both your thoughts. Maybe we start with Sohail and then go to Alex.
So, for all the listeners, you must know that if you ever end up interacting with MBA Exchange and the likes of Alex and Deepak, there is a tremendous amount of rigor involved in the processes that they maintain, and it is something that I eventually ended up enjoying during while it lasted. It was a tough process to go through to a fair extent, but I eventually ended up enjoying because I learned so much about myself. And for taking on from there, as far as focus and clarity on a professional role post the MBA is concerned, one must have clarity on how they want to utilize the MBA, what will be their end goals. This is something that is part of the application process. Notwithstanding, Eventually, when you come to the business school, it will so happen that there's a new world which will open to you. There will be new opportunities that you will be seeing. There's so much that you will be exposed to. So while you have been focused and clear until you reach the business school, probably you should not close your doors. After you have reached there, you must keep your doors open, observe and absorb as much as you can, and give yourself all the options. I think that's the way forward as far as I have seen so far. Alex, over to you.
I
Excellent.
totally. Oh, go ahead, Deepak.
No, over to you, Alex. Really curious to hear your answer on this.
So, if it wasn't explicit to the audience, I just want to, because I'm all about full disclosure. I am a former client of the MBA Exchange, but after getting through business school, I was also an admissions consultant for the firm, and still am actually. So I just want full disclosure because I want to answer this question from 3 standpoints, and I apologize. The first, because I think it's a very important one. First, for the purposes of getting accepted to business school, it is absolutely essential that you are able to articulate why you need an MBA and what you're going to do afterwards. No ifs, ands, or buts. And that's one of the reasons I failed. And that doesn't matter if you're a 2-year MBA program targeting in your 20s, or mid-career program in your 30s, or executive MBA program for that matter, in your later in life. And I'm going to give you a specific example of a client I worked with in a second. On the personal side, you don't necessarily need to know. I didn't, but I certainly didn't. And that's how I kind of came across my first time, and one of the major reasons I failed. The second time, it's crystal clear. Although I had no intention of doing what I said I was going to do, it's something that I conceivably could have done. And I think that's important, that you pick something that, if you pick something that you are not passionate about, it'll come across, whether it's in your essays or in an interview. Human beings are incredibly perceptive. So I picked something with the help of my consultant that I conceivably could do and could get me excited, although I didn't know and it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I didn't know what I really wanted to do. So those are the 2 ways to answer the question, but I want to give you something specific because as we say often in admissions consulting, at least I do, I love to tell stories so that light bulbs start going on from your side. Broadly speaking, especially for a mid-career program, a lot of veterans have a lot of experience in applying later. Generally, it's not always the case. The schools see 2 types of people. One, they're doing very well in their organization. Oh, actually 3. If you're in the military, you're leaving the military and want to use business school to transition to a civilian life career. Or you're already left the military, you're doing well in your organization, and you've been tapped for bigger things like directors, even C-level people, and that's the story you're telling, and the company backs you up. One of your recommenders might say, yeah, Suhail is amazing, and he's the director of finance right now. We've already tapped him to be the CFO someday, and we want to send him to business school. So that's a typical mid-career or executive MBA program story to tell. The third one is career transition. I've been doing X all my life. I want to do Y. I need tools, and I need a network, and I need some help making that jump. But here's why I want to make the jump, and here's how business school is going to help me. So that's another typical story path or arc you can use. So I promise I'll give you a specific example. I'm purposely choosing a really esoteric one, but it'll hopefully make sense. I had a client who was a baker, and she wanted to get into investment banking. And on the surface, like, no way. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, they're not going to hire a former baker. And she was mid-career too. So, I mean, there are college kids coming out of Wharton, Stanford, Harvard, MIT, getting quant jobs in investment banking. As it turns out, when we started to get to know each other deeper, she was not just a baker, she owned a bakery. And in the town she was, major city, she ended up opening 2 or 3, actually a second store and a third store. So she was always good at math from a young age, happened to be Asian, not that that matters necessarily. And she, what turned her on was when she was opening the second store, she had to get a valuation of her 4th store and work with the bank and figuring that out to be able to get the loan to do it. And then labor rates were different. And then the whole valuation piece of it, she loved that. And then she had to do it a second time for her 3rd store. So in some way, in some scale, much smaller scale, she was doing what investment bankers do. So that became our story. We weaved that together, and she got into every program she applied to, she got into. I mean, she had a great stats too from her undergrad, and her test scores were very high on top of everything else, and her recommenders were amazing. But that story of I'm a baker and I want to become an investment banker. On the surface, it didn't make sense, but we delved deeper, and it did make sense. And she ended up at Goldman Sachs, by the way, after she graduated. So anyway, I
Fantastic.
don't know if that helps.
That's a very reassuring and inspiring story, Alex. Very vivid story about a baker moving on to Wall Street with Goldman Sachs. There's a specific question that has come up for Sohail. This actually comes from someone whose initials are TMSP, so we don't know what his or her name is. But the question that they have is, how do you decide, or how did you decide when you were looking at your MBA programs and the shortlist, whether you wanted to apply to programs in India or whether you wanted to apply to something outside of India? So a specific question, and as you know, Sohail, we work with a lot of Indian veterans. So for them, do you have any specific advice on schools in India, mid-career transition via maybe an ISB, IIM, PGPX, two top programs versus following your path and moving west?
Yeah, so I think the three parts, Deepak, you might have to help me out here. It's industry, role, and
Geography.
geography. Yeah, so the three parts make a lot of difference as to when this is the clarity that a veteran who's transitioning must have when he is looking to hang his uniform, whether he wants to change industry, whether he wants to change roles. Industry and role invariably get changed. At this point in time, the decision to make a geographical change, how will that help you? That one has to be very clear. The is it the kind of exposure that you get? What is it that you're going to gain from this particular program, which will be different from gaining a degree from probably ISB or IIM? That has to be very clear. Whether you want to change geographies, and there is a learning over here which is unequal to what may be offered, because I'm already here. I can probably say that with some conviction that it is probably much different from what schools in India would be able to offer. So to that extent, one has to take a decision. It will also depend on various other issues of family backgrounds, commitments, visa issues. There is a lot that is part of this one bucket, So one has to keep all those things in mind. And changing geography, how will that empower you as far as you being a professional is concerned? Whether you want to migrate to a different country or for what reasons do you want to be there, all these things do make a lot of difference. So to keep all these things in mind and thereafter take a call whether you want to undergo the MBA outside of your country. Also, there's one aspect that people always get worried about is the financial aspect. I feel the financial aspect should be the least of the worries and the last of the concerns, because if you end up doing your MBA from a school of this stature, it is one, the loans are very easy and straightforward to avail to start with, and thereafter there is a process that you get into which will allow you for an a straightforward, easy, repayment of the loan. That particular process. It is not something that should worry individuals or that should discourage anyone at all. The aspect of monetary capability as such.
Great points, Sohail. Very, very helpful. There's just a follow up that comes from Devinder Chidar, so I just wanted to bring that factor in. His question is specifically about the fact that is the background of someone being from special forces within the armed forces. If they come from a part of, in his case, he's asking, he's from submarines. So, is that a matter of concern for visa application, especially when one is coming to the US? If you are part of some special forces within the Indian Army? Is visa going to be an issue?
At the outset, I don't think so. So I we do have somebody from the submarines, but he in my present cohort, but obviously he's from the U.S. Navy. But then this shouldn't be a concern. Probably this is Devendra, right?
Yes.
Devendra has connected with me individually also. I'm sure I'll be able to throw some light on that to him when we connect in person. But at the out, as it seems, it's not an issue that you have had any specialist roles. Your specialist roles are what will take you, make you climb the ladder in the industry. That is what is the line over here.
Sure. Would probably want to go back a little to the discussion we were having earlier around careers, and maybe loop in Alex for this one. Alex, we've been working with veterans at MBA Exchange for a long time. As you know, we have a lot of veterans on our team who've gone on to do various different things. From entrepreneurs in the technology space to working for Google to management consultants to going to manufacturing firms and going to, let's say, aerospace, which may be adjacent to some of the work they were doing. Are there any specific career options which gel better for a veteran background than some other options of industry function that we were speaking about? And I ask this question because some of the veterans, especially from India and what happens in the Indian environment, think about functions which are very closely related to what they have been doing: supply chain, logistics. So that's where most of the goals end up being. It will be fascinating for people to hear if you think that a veteran background opens up a much wider choice of industries or functions for veterans.
It's a very good question. On the surface, one could say, management consulting, investment banking, operations, FedEx, Amazon are well suited for military veterans. But I hate pigeonholing. And the reason I say that is even though I was a combatant in the military, we had finance people, we had administration people, we had logistics people, we had pilots, we had infantry, we had special forces, we had submariners. I mean, you name it. It's the military in itself has every industry and function. And so I hate pigeonholing. I would say I would rather answer the question saying that in general, we bring leadership, management, responsibility, some of the things Suel said earlier, the drive to get the mission completed no matter what, but balancing that with what we call troop welfare or taking care of your people, which I think is often not sung enough in business school and in business in general. You take care of your people, they'll move mountains for you. That's something all officers learn. So those skills can really be applicable to anything. I would add one caveat to that, and it really is kind of perhaps obvious, but it depends on also what your specific specialty was in the military. I was a pilot, and as it turns out, a job that I got relatively easily was doing business development for an aerospace defense company. That was my first full-time job out of business school. It was a company called Textron. They own Boeing, Cessna, and a bunch of other companies. They also do easy go golf carts, but it was natural for me to do business development as a former pilot, knowing the products and the customers very well. That could be same for someone who ran operations. A friend of mine who's a Navy, I won't say her name just in case, she was a classmate of mine. She was a Navy officer. Actually, she's still in the reserves. She works operations at Amazon. And it was a natural fit for her because she did operations in the Navy. So I'm kind of contradicting myself, but I would say that just because you're in the military, it doesn't necessarily pigeonhole you into anything. And actually, a former Navy SEAL class after me, I know he wouldn't mind. His name's Jeff. He ended up starting a company in the titanium industry of all things, startup. He was a Navy SEAL, came directly into business school, and then did a startup right out of business school. So I would say the sky's the limit. But having said that, yeah, on the very surface, being analytical, being responsible, operations minded, all those things you would think they would lend to certain industries and functions, but I would not limit yourself to that.
That's some great points there, Alex, and especially the examples of a few people demonstrating that there are role models who've ended up doing work and reach success, pinnacle of success in different areas post their careers as veteran. Um, there's a question that I particularly like, and you know what? I'm not scaring the both of you, but there are some questions that I had, and there are so many more questions that have come up. We may need to do a part two at some point in time. Just going by that, keeping one eye on the time. But I wanted to get this question in. Um, and I'll actually paraphrase the question because it's an interesting question. This is from Amit Kushwaha, and he asks, just as a personal question to both of you, only if you like to share with us. So that's his qualifier. His question is, what's the purpose of your life or personal mission of your life? Very broad question, deep question. So maybe we start with you, Alex, first. Have you
Oh,
figured out what's the purpose of your life?
I was hoping Suel would go first. Wow, that's putting me on the spot, but I don't mind. I will answer the question personally and professionally. On the professional front, I'm a Gemini. Not that that necessarily means anything, but dichotomy. I've worked at very large corporations, public Fortune 200 companies. As an executive, I've started companies from scratch, 2, 3 people, and in the middle, like a medium-sized company, 800 million revenue, barely public. So I've and later stage startups. So I've kind of had the gamut. I've been very lucky. A bad way of saying it is that I don't know what I want to do, and I'm 53 years old, by the way. I still don't know what I want to do. Is a bad way of looking at it. Jack of all trades, master of none is another. But there's one common thing, and I just started another company, which is not for this conversation. Brand new company with a business partner of mine. What I'm interested in is business culture, organizational culture. Whether it's I'm part of a large organization or a small one that I'm actually starting, or a medium one, that's what drives me. Is that to foster an environment where people get up wanting to come into work. I don't, hopefully some of you haven't had this experience, but quite frankly, I've had jobs. Actually, it's not the job, it's the boss or the boss's boss, where I wake up not wanting to go into work. Thank God it's happened very rarely, but it has happened in my life. And I hated it. I hated those times. And so that's what drives me, is that wherever I'm, whether I'm part of a larger group or I'm a group I'm in charge of, I want to foster an environment where people wake up wanting to come into work. So that's on the professional side. On the personal side, we have 2 children. I mean, if I, heaven forbid, I took a bullet right now, I've lived my life. I have no regrets. Well, I haven't visited Mumbai yet to see you, Deepak, so that's still on my bucket list. But really, it's all about our children now. One of our children is in college, and one's still in elementary school. We have quite a spread between the two. What can I do to help them be prepared for life and setting them up so that, not necessarily financially, although that would be nice too, but just giving them the life skills to be good people and get along with their peers and contribute to their communities that they're part of. That's what drives me, and that's what I focus on now when I'm not working. So those are my 2 personal missions, I guess, to answer that question.
Fantastic to hear you. Sohail, balls in your court. What's the professional and personal mission?
So the professional part, I've been in the army, and I was there for my country, and I entered the army at a very young age. At 17 years of age, I made a decision to be in the army and serve my country. I was able to achieve quite a few things that I wanted to in terms of influencing lives. I've served my country all right. I was able to influence lives also. And this was within the landscape of my country. At this stage, the business school is only a stepping stone. But again, this is a huge stepping stone, so to say, because the MIT community is immense. Eventually I would look to influence probably a larger landscape of the globe, and be able to work towards something that influences lives of each and every one of us. And that there's so many discussions you and I have had, Deepak, on this. There's a climate change thing that I want to work on, and there are some people that I'm in touch with at Harvard for this. But yes, this place, when you get here, whatever your thought process may be, whatever your calling may be, whatever your end goals may be, you'll have all the opportunities, ample number of opportunities once you're here. That is why I feel, I think it was a fantastic decision for me to have taken on this particular journey. On the personal side, I think my father has been a fantastic example for me. I want to do the same for my son. I think that pretty much sums it up.
Fantastic, fantastic. There was a question that came on earlier, which probably it's the right time to take it up now. Um, Devinder again was asking about the ratio of veterans versus not veterans in a course. So it's a broader question. When a veteran is looking at shortlisting programs that they want to go to, aside from everything else, 1 year, 2 year cost, coming with family, children, you talked about how the cost is structured. Sohail, is the ratio of veterans in the program even a consideration? Did you ever look at it? And I'll throw that open to Alex also. Is it important to look at that ratio in a business school? How many veterans in class?
Mm, I'll go first.
Yes, please.
Yeah, yeah. It's a no consideration. It's a big zero whatsoever. Nothing whatsoever. It is what you bring to the class as an individual. That is why I mentioned earlier, you have to pitch your story. If you are worthwhile of getting into the B school, no matter who else is there, you will be there. It's never about what your competition is in a huge way. You have to pitch yourself. So number of veterans, it just doesn't matter. We have almost about 10 to 11, but I don't think the mix clearly tells that nobody has been chosen based on the numbers which were supposed to be there from a certain part of the geography of the world, or a certain type of military, whether it was Navy, Air Force, or the Army, or it was the Coast Guard or something else. They're there because they all have some stories, and they are all unique. That's what you have to make yourself to be. Yeah.
I completely agree with Suel. When I was looking, it wasn't a consideration. On the surface, it's a very narrow question, but putting on my 3 decades of admissions consulting hat on, the broader question is demographics in general, right? Let me answer the specific question first. Every top tier school wants some percentage of military veterans, and most schools will even tell you what the percentage is. Does that really matter? And that's where I'm going with this. I don't care what the demographics is, your age, or really the relevant thing is number of years of work experience, your industry, your function, where you come from, your ancestry, your ethnic background. All these things are nice to know, but in the end, it doesn't help you or hurt you. It's about you. And so, I mean, I always used to joke the dream client is the transgender, 1/3 Native American, 1/3 Russian, 1/3 Somali person that, you know, so I say that tongue in cheek. That makes them somewhat unique. But in the end, even if you come from an overrepresented demographic, it's about you and differentiating your story to the admissions officers. And whatever part demographic buckets you fit into, of course, you're going to be compared to those other people. How do you, I don't want to use the word outshine, but how do you differentiate and how do you tell an authentic story about yourself that differentiates you from those groups? One of the toughest groups to apply to business school, and I hate to say this, but it's true, it's Indian male engineers. We all know this, right? It's a very tough demographic. But you could be a Caucasian person born and bred in the United States and coming from McKinsey. That's also a tough demographic because that's part of their career path, and all the management consultants are applying that want to continue on in management consulting. So it's not about the demographic. It's good to know what demographic buckets you fit into, but I would argue that it's irrelevant. One, you can't control it. And two, all the top tier schools want a mix of everyone. And so it's a matter of get over that and figure out what story do I want to tell and how I'm going to tell it so it differentiates me and makes me a compelling person for the school to choose.
Fantastic. A lot many more questions have come up. I'm probably going to combine a few of those questions. The flavor of some of those questions is around the long-term goal, and we spoke about goals earlier. Um, Colonel Anil Deshpande's question is related, and a few other questions are related. Let's start with you first, Sohail. The thrust of the question seems to be if someone doesn't know what their long term goal is, hasn't figured it out yet, should one still jump into the application process? Start the application process, or would you suggest to do some introspection on the long term goal before you jump into the process?
The application process will be dependent upon various timelines, the application timeline itself, and where how one is individually disposed as far as his life is concerned and his career is concerned. So I don't think one can compromise a lot as far as that particular aspect is concerned. But I think it's a very clear picture emerges as to when one wants to get an idea about these things. One also, that is where the consultancy aspect comes in, and I will not shy away from mentioning that I knew a lot about what I had done when I was an applicant. To understand better as to what I could get into and what I could influence, Deepak helped me in a big way, and that Deepak, those aspects remain my mantra even as on date. So uh, I think the application process has to start at some point in time. That is not necessarily under an individual's control, but how choosing the right consultant, going to the right person, and how he helps you dive into things and come up with a plan for the future. I think that does help. It helped me immensely. So I mentioned this.
Before we go to Alex with that question, I'm just gonna throw in a question that might be quite useful for some of them looking at this live or probably looking at the recording. And I want you to go a little broad here, Sohail. Um, when someone is looking to engage an admissions consultant, yes, you've reached the stage where you're looking to apply, you're applying to competitive schools, and you're in the market for an admission consultants. And this market now is suddenly more crowded than a local Mumbai train. We know that there are so many service providers. So it's not, I mean, I don't envy the job of an applicant to pick the right consultant, in your view, and take a broad picture of this, right? Uh, just don't only be sort of restricted to our experience of working together, but imagine you're addressing the world here on stage and giving 2 3 top parameters on how to choose what to look for in an admissions consultant. So what would you say?
First of all, I think there's a very practical way of going about it. I know about Deepak. He will sit with you and talk through your experience and story and your future plan for 45 minutes for sure. And it will be something. It will be a process which is free of charge. So don't worry about that. Uh, so please spend this time with all consultants. Please take this time. This has to be a very detailed process. You cannot go to a consultant based on his spoken reputation and because you were convinced by someone else recommended this, so you have gone to this person. No, it doesn't work that way. Please interact with all the consultants that you shortlist. See what their approach is, see what their plan is, how they're going to bring out your personality which suits the business school. You probably don't even know that you have certain aspects which have to be presented to the business school in a certain manner. This is what the consultant's role is. This is what he'll bring out. So please go for the discussion. Once you finish those 45 odd minutes with each of the consultant, you will know whom you want to go with. That's my answer.
Thanks.
I
Thanks
hope
for
it makes
that.
sense.
It's authentic and practical, and hopefully very very useful for anyone listening in. Alex, therefore, two-part question to you now.
Mhm.
Should one have some clarity on the long-term goal before one jumps into this process? And secondly, in your view, having seen it from both sides, from your objective view, what should one look for in a consultant? So, two-part
Yes.
question for you too, Alex.
Two-part question. I'll actually answer three different things. One is I just want to be respectful of other people's time. We're coming up in an hour. Just FYI, I can stay on longer, but we are coming up an hour, so I wanted to acknowledge that. So the first question, long-term goal. I would say in general, and I agree with everything Suel mentioned, and you used a word earlier that I think is a key word that any time you're applying to school, and it does it for college for that matter, or other graduate schools, self-reflection. Suel mentioned those words earlier. And part of self-reflection is where have I been and where do I want to go? And the long-term goal fits into where I want to go. Many schools actually ask that question explicitly, but even if they don't, like Stanford's infamous, what's most important to you and why, you don't have to necessarily, but it's a perfect way to end the essay. Like, hey, this is what's most important to me and why, and this is how I leverage this, and this is where I want to go with it in my life. So I would say in general, being able to figure out what your long-term goal is and being able to articulate that is very important. There can always be exceptions. We always say it depends when it comes to admissions, but I would say that would be my answer. And I'm trying to be succinct because of time here. The second question, I'll be very honest. The second time when I applied, I looked for a business school admissions consultant. I started off with 8 firms. And I had a spreadsheet going and I had analysis and all these little buckets and trying to quantize things. Yeah, I mean, and as someone who wants to go to get their MBA, maybe that kind of makes sense. My 2 cents would be, I agree with Suel. Get your shortlist going and start talking to the people that you're actually going to be working with. Remember, you may pick a firm that's excellent, and I like to think the MBA Exchange is amazing, but in the end, you're working with a consultant from that firm. Find out, and if the firm isn't willing to work with you on figuring that out, then maybe it's a firm that you maybe pass on. But once you figured out who you might be working with, have a conversation with those people. So I had 8 firms that I looked at initially. I was pretty quickly able to narrow it down to 2. And between the 2, the MBA Exchange was one of them. The other one, they were both great. And I'm convinced to this day that I could have been fine with either one of them. But this is the part to finish answering the question, is that assuming you can have conversations with the people that you're going to actually end up working with, they may be great. They may have a great track record. They may, and a number of reviews on Poets and Quants is another issue. Having a lot cannot necessarily be a good thing, but the quality of the reviews, I would argue, is important. What's your chemistry with them? They may have an amazing track record and be an amazing admissions consultant, but they may not be the right person for you. Some people like, as a client, you like more transactional. Some people like to know the whys. Some people want to talk more. Some people don't want to talk less and do more by email. Whatever criteria it is, chemistry is really intangible. And I think figuring out what does your gut say between consultant A and consultant B. They're both kind of equalish on paper, but my heart really says consultant B. Listen to that, I would say. So that would be part of my answer, adding on to what Suel said.
Gentlemen, and Alex alluded to this, it's a time we're cognizant of everyone's time, especially in India where it's getting to be late evening, and we've also sort of we have to be cognizant of Alex and Sohail's time. It's probably been the fastest 1 hour I've had on camera. And that's thanks to the fascinating conversation. Just getting this started, I knew that this would be a very interesting conversation, but this has exceeded expectations. Hopefully it's exceeded expectations for anyone who's listened in. I could go on for an hour more very, very easily, but maybe we'll do a part 2 someday, inshallah. So thank you so much, Sohail. Thank you so much, Alex. There are a few questions we didn't get to. Happy Go Lucky Blokes, your handle. And yes, I know I got your question, Devjyoti, and I got your question, Ayush. Go to the MBA Exchange website, reach out to us, send me an email, and I'll get to your specific answers. So thank you everyone who attended. Thanks to Abhijit for organizing this, and thank you so much, Alex and Sohail, for being a part of this.
Thanks, Deepak. Thanks, Alice.
It's a pleasure. Good luck to everyone.
Good luck.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.